Just want to remind everybody that this is recorded because there's other people that may want to see this down the road because we have a great special guest today. So we'll get started in a couple minutes. I'll give it to 11:31 by my camera on my clock on my computer. Oh, it just hit 11:31. I want to welcome you to AARP on Tap. My name is Kathi Schwan, and I'm the volunteer state president for North Dakota. This is recurring on every third Friday of the month at 11:30. And these monthly sessions are to give you some insight into where we're going in 2022. Together, it gives us a chance to discuss these questions and identify the issues and actions North Dakota AARP is taking for the benefit of those over 50 in North Dakota. And like I said, as you know, I'll be hosting this series every third Friday of the month in 2022 at 11:30 Central Time, and I'm so happy you've joined me. Today, I'm excited to welcome a special guest who is joining me today. His name is James McSpadden, and James is a senior policy advocate with the Senior Policy Advisor with the AARP Public Policy Institute. During the interim, legislators are studying prescription drug prices and policies, and James has been invited to present at the upcoming Health Care Committee meeting on March 2nd. That's pretty exciting. He's here today to give us some insight into drug pricing and access to medicine for older adults. James, welcome.
Thank you.
We hope to see your smiling face there.
Good to be here.
Good to have you. And last month, we talked about a recent article that was published by AARP that showed what the average cost of gasoline, milk would be if they were priced similar to how prescription drugs are priced. And I think Janelle has a great graphic to show us on that. It was really eye-opening about what the actual cost would be if we compared 2006 to 2020, if they were priced like prescription drugs. And James, can you tell us a little bit about what goes into the cost of prescription drugs and why they've gone up so much?
Sure, happy to. It's going to be a pretty short answer because the bottom line is we don't know everything that goes into the price of drugs. Manufacturers don't have to provide details on the information. Prices are really set according to what the market will bear. And we kind of have to take that at face value. There are certain things that probably get folded in, things like supply and demand and supply chain markup and et cetera, a number of things like that. Research, but one of the favorite talking points of manufacturers is that it's all due to research and development, that we have to set these prices so high because it costs so much to develop the drug. Development is very important and we don't want to undermine it, but the reality is that most manufacturers spend more on marketing than they do on research and development.
James, if you look at the situation with insulin, doesn't that blow that whole theory out of the water? Because that patent was given for $1 when it was invented.
Sure. I mean, if we want to get into patent issues, we can get into a whole nother conversation. I mean, the life of a drug's patent is able to be extended year after year after year for a whole host of reasons that don't make a ton of sense, frankly. And so insulin is a great case of that. And Humira is another great, Humira is a great poster child for it. So there are a number of things that go into it. we've been tracking prices for a very long time here at AARP, and we know that slide about inflation is such a great tool to talk and understand this. No one's going to pay $13 for a gallon of milk, right? It seems unbelievable, but yet all the time we pay a price that we are given for prescription drugs. We know. I'm going to make this one point. In our research, we saw that one brand name drug used on a chronic basis would have been almost $3,700 lower in 2020 if prices had been limited to inflation. So, we took this big basket and we looked at a whole bunch of drugs that people 50 plus use, and just saw that if we kept it at that rate of inflation, around 2%, something like that per year, rather than the huge increases that happen year after year, we'd all be paying a lot less for drugs.
Is there anything we can do about it? I mean, whether North Dakota or AARP, what can we do to stop this rapid escalation of prices of prescription drugs?
Yeah. But there's a number of things we can do, right? I think one of the most powerful things that we all can do as individuals is to tell our story. Until you put a face on the challenges of affordability, it seems like sort of an idea that you can't quite wrap your head around. So telling your story to legislators, whether through an email, phone call, testifying in person, face-to-face meeting, if you know someone, is a really powerful thing to do, and certainly has helped us achieve a lot at AARP. And in telling your story, Kathi and I were talking before we started the call. Kathi is a living example of this. She is, fighting with a PBM and her insurer to try to get some money back for a problem on affordability that was just presented to her without any input. So that's one thing we can do. We've supported a number of reforms. There needs to be reform at the state level and at the federal level, and we're working very hard to do that as well.
Do you mind if I show my example?
Please.
These are the actual bottles. It cost me $0 on December 14th when I got this refilled. And it was at that time tier 2. I didn't know that, but I figured because it was 0, that would be the case. So I go to the doctor for my annual wellness check, and he re-prescribes for the new calendar year. And the insurance company charged me $267 because they moved it to a tier 4. Now, I didn't know that because I go on AARP, or not AARP, but Medicare.gov, and I look at all the prices of my prescription drugs, and that helps me make the decision, the deductibles and the costs on which plan I'm going to choose. Well, I chose the same plan that I had the last year, but yet $267. So many phone calls back and forth with the benefit provider, the in-between mail order house. My local drugstore kind of warned me something was coming. They kind of tipped me off because their price was exorbitant. And so then I went to, and I called, and they said, oh, it'll be 0. Well, little did I know, just within days of that conversation, they moved it to tier 4, and they auto deducted $267 from my credit card. And from there, I've been fighting ever since. I even was fighting them before they even mailed me the drug. And so what I did is I put a stop payment on it, looked for a tier 2 drug that was 0 cost, went back to my doctor, and he took the other one off the table and prescribed this 0 cost drug, got it in the mail. Now I'm actually, if I can find an address to have them have a written signature to accept those drugs back, they're going to get them back in their lap, because I'm not paying $267 for a drug I don't need.
Good.
But that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah. And I mean, and that's why we want to reform situations that prevent this from happening. Example of this is, on Medicare.gov, does it make sense to present different information to ensure that anyone who goes on there can easily see if a drug or any benefit really has had significant changes from year to year, because insurers do make changes, and that's okay, as long as we let people know and they have the information in order to make the right choice, which wasn't your case and isn't the case for a lot of people.
Well, what would move a drug from a tier 2 to tier 4 like that?
Well, it's probably not the drug that moved, but it's the arrangement of the formulary. So tier 2 is typically non-preferred generic drugs.
Right.
So you have a generic, your plan says, all right, we'll cover this on tier 2, even though there may be a therapeutic equivalent in tier 1, which is preferred generics. And then tier 4 is non-preferred brand typically. And so what happens is that generic that you were taking drops completely off the formulary, and they've added in, because they've negotiated with drug manufacturers, a brand name drug that is in the same therapeutic class and is of, for some reason of greater benefit to them, partly because you're paying more out of pocket for it at that point than they would be. So there's a lot of switching that happens, and it's as drugs come on market, go off market, get a generic equivalent, they're shifting.
The sad part of that discussion with the mail order pharmacy is they more or less blame my doctor for not knowing the difference in price over the course. And, in my conversation with him, he said, oh man, if I had to know the price of every drug, I couldn't do this job. Yeah. And I think it's unfair. There's no way that maybe well-known drugs that everybody knows are really high price, that's one thing, but everyday drug, he's not going to know that the price is going to shift. I'm sure they don't give them a long list of the change in the tiers, but
yeah, and tough. I think that you're right. I mean, the changes happen so often, it shouldn't be on a prescriber to know everything. We do support a kind of tool that would allow them to check that, because a lot of them don't even have the information available. Much, put aside whether they have time to do it, but they don't even have the information available. So if we could put that in their hands, then that's one step that we could get toward them having some information as well. You can see the theme that I'm kind of hammering home here is information.
I see that you're going to testify in North Dakota on March 3rd. Can you tell me a little bit about what you'll be talking about and what you expect in response?
Sure. So I've been invited to talk about the drug price landscape. So this interim committee, I think it's a committee, interim committee has been formed to explore a number of things. One of which is, what kinds of prescription drug reforms make sense for North Dakota. North Dakota put in place a drug transparency law last session, and it has already gone into effect, and we're seeing great results from it. But what are the next steps that can be taken to actually limit both the costs that individuals pay and the prices that the state pays? So I'm going to be testifying on kind of how the drug price landscape has shifted over time from a kind of a mixed bag of a number of generics and brands and first-in-class drugs to now what is a landscape that's really dominated by what are called orphan drugs, or very specialty niche drugs that really only serve a very small population, but cost a whole lot of money and really drive up a state spending and hit a consumer's pocketbook pretty hard. So talk about that, and then I'll be talking about what the impact of particular reforms would be if implemented. So we'll talk about things like prescription drug affordability boards, a group that can actually look at drugs that are causing affordability challenges for North Dakotans and say, this just isn't fair. There's no basis, there's no evidence for this. We should have a lower price and then get manufacturers to pay that price. All of these reforms go back to the point of manufacturers are the ones who are setting the prices, and that until we address the actual high price of prescription drugs that are set by manufacturers, we can't have meaningful reform. So you can address middlemen issues, all that you want. You can exit other supply chain issues, but until we actually get to the price of drugs, we're all one way or another going to be paying high prices.
And isn't it, you could go to a pharmacy, and should it be the norm that you ask, what is the retail price and what's my insurance price? Because
Sure.
Because I had an experience recently where I was picking up medicine. I happened to go to Costco, and they were giving it to me, and I said, oh my gosh, what happened to that price? It was like 80 something.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only for 30 days. And they said, wait a second, do you have a Costco membership? And I did. And they said, let me come back. And Costco then sold it to me for $13 at retail.
Yeah.
And, that is something that they do. But I also had a friend that he was paying $150 for one of his drugs. And then because he lives in Minnesota, we looked up GoodRx, because Minnesota, they use it more readily in Minnesota than North Dakota because of the North Dakota laws. And so he filled it this morning in Perham, and he only paid $13. Magic number 13, I guess. But, people just never think to question, if you have insurance, that the retail price could in fact be cheaper.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that go into that. Drug manufacturers, when they have very expensive drugs, set aside a lot of money to issue coupons. So they will greatly discount the price of their drug in order to get greater take-up of it. And this is what GoodRx does. This is what you can get coupons directly from the manufacturer as well. Coupons are really important for a lot of people, because without them, they wouldn't be able to afford drugs. But the kind of seedy side of coupons is that they allow that total price to remain high for as long as the life of the drug's patent. And so one person who gets it at a greatly discounted rate means that another person who doesn't have access to that coupon is probably going to pay later on. Or if the coupons start to diminish, which happens over time too, then everyone pays a higher price. So it's a very complicated system. And I agree with you, Kathy. People should ask. People should not be paying more. And until we get great reforms in there, people should ask. In North Dakota, they passed a law a few years ago that bans a gag clause that was formerly in place between PBMs and pharmacists. That wouldn't allow a pharmacist to tell you if the drug was cheaper if you didn't use your insurance. So there are advances that are being made, and but yeah, these are the stories that you hear most often, is that people are going a variety of ways to find cheaper drugs.
I've seen in the news recently that Mark Cuban has started a program. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, so Mark Cuban's program is like a number of other ones where, he has negotiated with manufacturers, largely on generic drugs, to have them at a discounted rate. So he is essentially becoming a wholesaler, a PBM, and everything in one kind of shop, and is taking those rebates that manufacturers would have given to insurers and PBMs and just applying them directly to drugs and getting them out to people. So it's a good thing. I've taken a look at it. He's got a number of drugs in there. The thing that people should remember too is when you don't buy your drugs through your insurer, they don't count against the deductible, and they don't count against other things that you may need to apply. So other drugs may remain more expensive as well. So there's something to, just be sure if you're going to go do that you take everything into consideration.
When like, for example, if I have a certain drug that's higher priced, does it make sense to go back to your doctor or to your pharmacy and say, is there a different drug that does the same thing at a cheaper price? Who would be the most likely person, your pharmacy, to be able to offer you that advice?
So both, I think a provider and the person who wrote the prescription and the person who's giving you the drug. I think both of them have a ton of information about the equivalence of drugs, about what's available. And they, sometimes the doctor says you shouldn't take the generic equivalent for a variety of reasons. And so, there may not be a situation where you can switch so easily, but you could always ask the question. It never hurts. But there are reasons why certain drugs should be taken by certain people. So yeah, I just talked to them both.
So it's good to be proactive and seek out this was a real learning experience for me as far as what happened over the course of the last 30 days with this drug. But, I just always accepted the doctor knew best. And when I saw the formulary online after it was published of the many different options, it was surprising. So yeah. I'm always going to ask that question if there's a better drug or not a better drug, cheaper drug that does the same thing.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It is good to be proactive, but we also think that the system shouldn't be so complex that we have to be this proactive. So we're working in that direction too.
Yeah. Well, I was looking to see if anybody's asked any questions yet. And we do want you to tell your story. And there is a link in the messages there that you can share your story on prescription drugs. I know a couple of people on this site today have dealt with issues with the high cost drugs. And what we want to do is, make people aware that if our legislators don't hear your story, they're going to think that everything's okay. We really have to speak out and not look for another way around how to get it cheaper, but let's really do something so that people have a better understanding of what the costs are, how they can manage their costs, not ration their prescription. Mm-hmm. We just got to come up with a way to do it. And this really should be the year that we get this together, because we've been talking about it, and it unfortunately becomes such a political football.
Yeah.
But we don't want to play the game anymore. We just want to be able to take the drugs that we need at a decent price so we can afford them.
Yeah, this is an issue too that everyone has skin in the game, right? So it's not, it's when a legislator, when this issue comes up, they know it affects their constituents. It affects all of their constituents. High prices affect everyone, whether you directly take a drug that costs, $20,000 a month, or if you're in an insurance plan that offers that drug, your premium's going to be impacted. So everyone pays for the high price of drugs one way or the other. And until we lower that, we won't make a difference. I think there's a lot of momentum in North Dakota. It's very exciting right now. So I'm glad that that things are moving along. I see that Josh asked to talk about a few other reforms that I'll be talking about at the interim committee. Is it okay, Kathy, if I highlight a couple?
Absolutely.
So this price referencing is an idea that's been floated, and it's the idea of importing the price from other countries rather than importing the drugs from other countries. So I think many of us, if not all of us, have heard that Americans pay much more than other people around the world for the same drugs. And this is largely due to our system of a regulatory system. So they can here and they can't other places because they have bodies that sort of monitor the value of the drug and and set a price according to the value. Here, this idea here would be to import the price by looking at what they pay in Canada, what they pay in other OECD countries, and bring that in and set it as a top rate that different state payers or commercial payers would pay for that drug. Makes a lot of sense, and seems straightforward. The others that I'll sort of be pointing out, there are some that we don't like as much, but that are often talked about. One of them is capping the cost to a consumer for certain drugs. So putting a cap, no one pays more than $150 a month for any drug, or no one pays more than $50 a month for insulin. That's great. I mean, we're for it. We think it's a great idea, but we don't think it should stand alone, because if you don't reform other parts of the system and you just do a cap, you don't actually, you kind of squeeze the balloon. Those prices are going to be pushed over to other people. So we need to remember to, in addition to that, do some other reforms. So those are some examples of some other things that I'll be talking about.
I see Marilyn's asked a question that, this is one of the drugs that make no sense to be charging the kind of dollars they do. It's Restasis.
Yeah.
And, Marilyn and her husband have been getting that particular Waco, Texas produced drug from Argentina. And that's crazy that someone has to do that. I myself am a poster child for picking up prescription drugs for friends and family in Los Algodones, Mexico. And, it's crazy that they're produced in the US and they're labeled as such. And you go to another country and they're pennies on the dollar compared to what you would pay in the US. It makes no sense. So her question is, why aren't we charging other countries the cost of research and development for drugs produced in this country?
I think that's a great idea. I think those other countries would say no, thank you. But I think that spreading it around certainly makes sense. But until we can do that, what we shouldn't be paying more than what other countries do. And I think the research and development question is one that has evolved over time. I don't know the full history of how it was spelled out that manufacturers could fold that in as part of the cost that they would charge consumers, or sort of the price they would pay consumers. But over time, research and development has changed dramatically, right? I mean, they're developing many more drugs that never come to market, but that have high price tags. We're also subsidizing greatly as taxpayers the research and development already of many manufacturers through NIH and other federal agencies, but those aren't taken into account necessarily either. So some reform certainly needs to be done there at the federal level. I hear you, Marilyn.
For example, let's use the Restasis example, is the price, that the retail price there, is that consistent with the base price of what that product should be here, if all things were equal?
If all things were equal, the price would be less, because if all things were equal, the price would be based on clinical effectiveness data. It would say, okay, you had a bunch of people in a trial, and here's how they responded to it. And based on that, we think that a decent price would be X, Y, or Z. But that's not the way that that's the way it's done in a lot of countries in the world, but that's not the way that it's done here. There's a group in the US that does this. It's a third-party group that looks at drugs once they've been approved, or actually before they've been approved. They look at all the data and they say, all right, if we were going to set a price, which we don't have the authority to do, but if we were going to, it would be this price. And 100% of the time, their price is way lower than what the manufacturer comes out with. So, yeah.
So does the pharmaceutical companies, do they respond favorably to that kind of information, or it just goes out the window?
Yeah, it goes out the window because they don't have to do anything with it, right? They are not beholden to third-party analysis. And the FDA is not a price-setting entity. It approves drugs. It says these are safe, these are effective, they have clinical significance for people to take, and we will approve it. How the price is determined is up to the manufacturer. And we saw this. Aduhelm is a good example of this. The manufacturer said, all right, it's been approved. We think we're going to set the price. I forget what the price was. Let's say it was 30,000. We're going to set it at 30,000. Even though the clinical effectiveness data was not terrific and it almost didn't get approved, but they set it that high. And a bunch of payers, Medicare being one of them, said, no, thank you. We're not going to pay $30,000. And then the manufacturer came back and said, well, what if we sold it at $18,000? And so there's no reason why they dropped it that much. They just dropped it because they weren't going to get the take up. And frankly, that should be a pretty reasonable assumption in setting the price to begin with. So you can see that it isn't working, and we need to have some changes.
But that's kind of a form of negotiation if Medicare says we're not going to accept that. So, they always say Medicare can't negotiate. Isn't that really a form of negotiation?
Well, Medicare just said it. They make what's called a coverage determination, and they just said they weren't going to cover it. They didn't say, the negotiation really happens once Medicare has said they're going to cover it, and what price it gets covered at is then the negotiation that's being talked about at the federal level right now.
Do you know what percentage advertising is in the budget of pharmaceutical companies, that if they were consistent with every other country around the world and that was taken out of the picture, would that have a big impact on the price or just nominal?
Sure. I think it would have a huge, there are a lot of countries that don't allow direct to consumer advertising. So if you took that out, then, you wouldn't have those dollars to factor in. I don't have the figures in front of me, but I know that, for some manufacturers, their total expenditures of the year, up to 50% of it can be marketing, and so it's a huge chunk of what their bottom line is. If those dollars are saved on the expense side, do they get translated into offsetting prices? I don't know. These are profit-making companies, so they could be just turned into profit shares. But it would make a difference if there were some reforms to marketing. And we've seen some of them. I shouldn't say they haven't happened. Drug reps aren't able to do the same things they were able to do before. In some states, they have to now be licensed, and all of their encounters reported. So there are some reforms at foot, but probably some bigger ones too.
Yeah, that's the number one thing that any international person that comes to the U.S. notices right away, that drugs are being advertised, and they look at us and like, why?
Yeah.
But you've really covered a lot of ground for us today, James, and seeing no additional messages, is there any parting thoughts for us?
No, I think it's great to keep having these conversations. I think make your voice heard. It's a great thing. Tell your friends and family that you or they should not be paying the high prices that you pay, and there are ways to make a difference.
Okay, in wrapping up, a few housekeeping items. You can connect with us on Facebook at www.facebook.org/AARPND. There it is right there. And these are the upcoming events. It's so nice to be able to see these items. There's a lot of really good ones coming up. Protecting your personal info online, that is so key to so many different things. And, for those that are in the 50+ group, Social Security retirement readiness and Medicare retirement readiness. Those are huge. You just don't turn 62 and 65 and think everything happens automatically. You really need to do some planning for that. So those are really very informative. The healthy cooking, those wonderfully attended and informational sessions, and they're fun too. So thanks again for joining me, James. Don't forget to tune in and watch James during the Healthcare Committee meeting on March 2nd at video.legis.northdakota.nd.gov. And please join me on March 18th, where we'll have updates on the Healthcare Committee plans and start talking about our plans for the June primary election. We'll see you next month for another AARP on Tap. Thank you. Bye.